Today on Capitol Hill, senators are hearing testimony about the wave of threats against election workers that spawned in the wake of former president's big lie while following his 2020 election loss. The Department of Justice set up a task force to track threats, reviewing over 1,000 messages, and federal prosecutors have already charged 5 people with more charges expected. According to the DOJ, 58% of the total of potential criminal threats were from states that partook in recounts and audits, such as Arizona, Georgia, Colorado, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. One of the witnesses today at the hearing was a friend of the show, Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, who told the committee about the threats she's faced in her state.
Threats firsthand. One night in December 2020, I was about to put my son to bed when dozens of individuals descended upon our home. Growing in numbers over the course of an hour, they stood outside my front door, waking my neighbors, shouting obscenities and graphic threats into bullhorns. To this day, these images and this memory of that evening still haunts me. Not long ago, my son, standing in our driveway, picked up a stick, turned to me and said, "Don't worry, Mom. If the bad guys come again, I'll get them with this." He's 6 years old.
Joining us now, Jenna Griswold, Colorado Secretary of State and the chair of the Democratic Association of Secretaries of State. Welcome, Madam Secretary. I know you've been the subject of some of these threats in your state of Colorado. What's your reaction to all of this? And in particular, hearing Jocelyn Benson talk about those threats and what was your experience being threatened?
Well, thanks for having me on, Michael. And I think you can hear from Secretary Benson's voice the extreme amount of stress and emotion behind these threats. You know, predominantly women secretaries of state, younger Democrats, have been on the receiving end of thousands of threats since the 2020 election. In my case, I've received messages such as, "What's the size of your neck? I'm going to hang you from a tree. I'm going to get the rope to hang you." Over and over and over and over. The threats, to be very clear, they're against Secretary Benson, they're against me, they're against Katie Hobbs, but they're against us as secretaries of state. These threats are used as part of the attack on democracy to try to intimidate us. But we will not stop. We will not stop. It reaffirms our work to protect democracy going into 2022 and the 2024 presidential election.
So the DOJ said in their report that these threats came mainly from states that were battleground states that had audits or recounts stemming from the former president's baseless claims of a stolen election. So, for example, in Georgia, an alleged oath keeper who was charged recently with seditious conspiracy in Georgia had a death list, according to authorities, that included the name of an election official and their family. What's your reaction to hearing about this and having had similar experiences? What's the reaction among your community of Secretary of State's election officials to deal with these kinds of threats?
Well, it has brought secretaries of state very close to one another because we've gone through this experience that most of us couldn't imagine in the United States just a couple years ago. But my major reaction to the fact that election deniers, people who are trying to destroy democracy, have kill lists, death lists, is that state and local and federal government needs to take this very seriously. At this point, the DOJ Elections Task Force on election crimes has prosecuted 5 or 6 threats against election officials, one including threats against myself. But we need to see prosecutions. We also have to see state government take this seriously. That's why this last legislative session, I ran a bill making it a crime to retaliate or dox against election workers. And I also had to run a piece of legislation so that I could get normalized state patrol coverage myself.
Secretaries like yourself are going to be in a very interesting space this time next year and certainly going into the next election cycle. If some of the folks who are on the ballot who are election deniers running for secretaries of states and other election officials win, how do you process that? The DOJ has said that they intend to charge more people in regards to threats. But what else can Congress do? And how do you deal with someone who's holding an official office But they're not out there with the bullhorn, but they're still a threat to democracy.
We have to strengthen laws. So, for example, in Colorado, I passed the first law to make it a felony to see when there's an insider threat. So when an election official tries to destroy from within. We have to strengthen state laws. We have to strengthen federal laws. We have to see prosecutions. But frankly, Michael, we have to beat them at the ballot box. There are election deniers running for Secretary of State across this nation. And what we can expect from them is to suppress the vote, further destabilize elections, and lie to decrease confidence in the electoral process. They are a risk to American democracy, and Americans are going to have a heavy task come here in a couple of, 98 days, I think we're out from Election Day, to save American democracy. That is what is at stake in the 2022 elections, and I am so optimistic Americans are going to save the future of our country.
Colorado Secretary of State Jena Griswold, thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon. Really appreciate it. When we return,
thank you.
A big victory for America's veterans in their fight against senators who try to block expanding their health care. We'll get into that right after this.